Take it.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
3,
Okay.
2.
Magandang araw po sa inyo lahat. Nandito po tayo ngayon sa kasama natin ng Jun and Paul Show and Karateng Garahe. Si Kuya Henry, nag-iisa ngayon. At yung dalawa dyan, pakilala na kayo.
Oh! Henry!
Yo!
Anthony!
Yes.
Henry!
Julius!
So, relax lang tayo ngayon mga kaibigan. So, meron tayong bagong guest ngayon. Pangalan niya, pakilala, sino ka nga pa?
I would like to thank the Academy.
JB Bo, Julius Vladimir.
Yeah, so si Kuya Jun ba? Julius, no?
Julius
Right?
po. JB o Julius pwede.
Okay.
Kung Mexicano po kayo,
yeah.
kung sanay kayo mag-Espanyol, di Pancho na lang dahil Francisco Apelido ko eh.
So, magandang umaga sa inyo lahat. So, hopefully, this will be a great interview between Julius and between Jun and Paul Show and Karateng Garahe. As of the moment, wala si Kuya Hubert to join Kuya Henry. So, as usual, I am again the host of this. Napag-utusan po tayo.
Fighter and host! Yes!
So, wala po tayong magagawa. Pagtiisan ninyo ko. So, yun lang. So, can we already start now? Do you have any discussion that we need to start with? So, Jun and Paul Show, baka meron kayong tanong ngayon.
Background muna natin sa guest natin.
Yes.
Ay, oo nga pala.
Sure.
Nalimutan ko. Sorry. Okay, so, bro, Julius, can you give us some intro or background about yourself?
Yeah, so I will be. Don't worry about the subtitles. I'm gonna speak both in first in Tagalog and then I'll translate in English.
Awesome.
Nagsimula po ako when I was pito. So I started when I was 7. Sa probinsya po ng Bulacan sa Malolos. In the province of Malolos, Bulacan. Laki po ako ng Malolos. I grew up in Malolos. But I have family in Batangas. My mom's from Batangas. And my grandma, from my dad's side, have a house in Tondo. So that's kind of world known, right? Because it's a shanty town. I grew up in Malolos, and then every few weekends we would go back and forth to Batangas, right? My first background in FMA started about when I was 7, 8 years old. Lumang estilo, old style. Most people know that the most famous styles in Bulacan and Malolos is the book, the first book ever about Arnis, which karunungan sa larong Arnis, like knowledge of the play of Arnis or FMA, right? By Placido Yambao. It's very similar style, which is Espada y Daga based, right? It's really very heavily Spanish influenced. Because a lot of people don't know, the Academia de Militar, the original PMA in the Philippines, didn't start in Intramuros or later on, the later location in 1908 is in Baguio. It started in Malolos during the time of the revolution. So a lot of people know from that town, they know basically Filipino martial arts, right? Like indigenous form, like what they know about with the stick or how to handle a weapon, because most everyone had a farming tool, farming implement. Pero sanay din sila, they also know how to yung kilos ng mga Kastila, because obviously there's a lot of Spanish people there, right? In Malolos, there's a street. Ang tawag ay Kamistisuhan. And that's exactly what it means. So that's a very hard word to translate in English, but I guess the closest that you can think of is like half-breed street, right?
Yep.
Because like what ended up happening, the people that are really rich, the ilustrados, they don't want the land to go to the Indians. They want to keep all the rich to themselves. Obviously, it's a very familial thing, right? It's like very human thing, right? So what they would do is like Game of Thrones. They would marry their relatives, like, and that's a big joke in that street, yung sa Kamistisuhan. There's always one house na may unggo. So there's always one house that had to be politically correct here was, mentally handicapped, right? Because that's what happens when you fuck your cousin. That's what happens when you
We go
fuck
from
your cousin.
politically correct to just.
So right now we're starting with comedy. We're starting with comedy right now. So I learned that style from there. But people make a misnomer thinking that all the styles from Bulacan are just Hema based, and I really don't want to use the term Hema because in the Philippines it never became historical. European martial arts was just European martial arts. It wasn't historical European martial arts. It was alive. Okay, so it's just same thing in Laguna where you guys those forms that you do, yung mga kilos na ganyan, when you go like this and then you move this way, right?
Yeah.
Those are Italian
Yes,
fencing
yes.
forms. So no. Actually, there's 16th to 15th century like Spanish stances forms, right? And then later on, the Italian fencing influenced a lot. Destrezza was created to counter that because the Italian fencing form was very like top notch. So like the Spanish is like, damn, we're in trouble. We gotta figure out a way to get around this. And that's how Narvaez, basically started that basically Destrezza, right? There's the two main guys that they call, and then the one that has the Bible of Destrezza, which is some people think it's out of the box Destrezza, is this guy. It's a Dutch dude.
Yep.
T-Bolt.
Oh, so that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah. Right? Because back then the Netherlands wasn't a country. The Netherlands was a Spanish protectorate, essentially.
Correct.
Spain is like the first global empire. We think of the English, yung mga taga Inglaterra. But no, when the original phrase "the sun never set," the sun never set on the Spanish Empire, not the British one.
Correct.
Right? The British came. That was the power later when they got rid of the Armada and then they slowly ascended the ranks. But more on most people know European history, so let's exclude that. So I learned that style Malolos, but that's not the only style there. There's yung mga sa dulong barrio, sa Kaingan, sa Masukal, so places that are foresty, very filled with mga talahib, filled with trees, and where you need chopping tools like this, right?
Yeah.
Right. They have their own thing. They have their own style, and there's no numerado, there's no abecedario, there's no angles of attack. Like when I learned that as a kid, my grandfather, my dad's uncle, sorry. So my dad's mom, his brother, right? Yung ano ko my grand uncle essentially, right? Inampun niya ako dahil yung magulang ko dito sa Amerika sent us money. So I was not raised by my biological parents. I was raised by people that grew up in World War II. Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of them were still around in the 90s, right? Late 80s, early 90s.
Yep.
I noticed a difference of how he would teach me because obviously yung kay Yambao, it's like buhat araw, there's the espada form, tusok, tatsulok, that kind of thing. But then pag pumupunta kami doon sa Masukal, in places that may makilala siya na bihasa din sa Arnis, iba yung kilos nila. It's not more Emma influence. It's different. Because they don't, yung pasimuno nila, yung kanilang abecedario, yung kanilang, basically their ABCs, right? It doesn't have the numbering thing. They just told me like, feed me a situation. Like, what do you mean? Come at me. And then you either get it or you don't, like, so they would be like,
Yep.
So I'd be like, okay, palo ka dito. Ganyan, right? And then sabi ko, man, this is really different. Because, most Filipino martial arts is, so I'm going to use your perspective, okay? This is one, right?
Okay. Yep.
This is two, right?
Yes.
I noticed like you can tell how it's more native. There's patterns, but there's no 1 and 2. They don't number it. It's not the clock system. I mean, I guess it's the clock system, but they don't have a number for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I noticed like some of the old style, particularly in Batangas, because I obviously have, so I'm gonna go over that now. So that's my family in Malolos. A lot of them actually participated in our war for independence. So I know the history of Rizal's friends there very well. The people that were in the Academia Militar de Malolos during that time, Rizal's homeboys, that because he had a lot of friends in Bulacan. The guy who actually financed No Limitangere and El Filibusterismo was his best Filipino friend, because his best white friend is Blumentritt, right? His best Pinoy friend is Maximo Viola Isison, which is from Bulacan, from San Miguel, I believe. So we know the history very well, right? So this is a norm thing in the Philippines. If your clan or family fought during like the War for Independence, like the Spanish Philippine War for Independence, right? Philippine, War for Independence. Most likely, their descendants, their kids, grandkids, they were also the leaders of the insurgency in World War II. So that didn't change much. Kung sino yung siga, kung sino yung may makitig at matapang matipuno nung lumaban sa mga Kastila, and then later they fought the Americans, right? Because like they were allied with the Americans, and then we had that engagement where the guy from Nebraska pulled the first trigger and then caused the war. They fought the Americans. Their kids in turn, their kids and grandkids, they fought in World War II. Because it makes sense, because like they would be the military types, right? Sila yung mga para mga gatpuno. Sila yung what now would be the equivalent of barangay captain or something. Or they later became, when the war was over with the Americans, because the Philippines was pacified in the late 1900s. There were still skirmishes actually pretty late in the South up to like the 1910s. Obviously, you know about the history of Malvar, because the only reason why he surrendered in Timuca, Tagalugan is because he didn't want any more of his friends to get killed. He really cared about his people.
Correct.
But he's the last one when it comes to our area, when it comes to the actual revolutionaries and the non-Moros, right? And then after that, there's the Pulahan movement, which kind of came around the same time in Samar Leyte. But basically, if you fought there and you were a leader, the Americans were actually very lenient on you. You became the leader in your area. So if you were like a major, colonel, captain, lieutenant, whatever, like a mayor ka, maybe you became the governor of your town, of your province, So that's how it was. This martial culture was preserved. It didn't just like stop like in 1898 to like 1904 or 1917 or however you want to count when the skirmishes ended, right? Because basically they were still fighting in the South. They never really pacified the islands, They more like bought them out, right?
Right.
So sa Bulacan, there's the style that most people know because they had made a book about it, but there were a lot more other styles. Bulacan is right next to Pampanga. They're known for their Sinawali, right? So we had interaction with them. That generation of escrimadores and arnisadores died very recently. Because we had the famous Bolo men, because there's a lot of people that were PC, and then before that, there were quadrillos, right? Or Guardia Civil. And then during the war, they became the Bolo men, right? Like famous divisions, right? That just died after the insurgency. And I'm going to explain why later. I think this is my theory anyway on why it died, right? So yung Angel, obviously the most famous one is the Placido Yambao, which feels more like modern FMA. And then they took a lot of yung mga tusok, because there was a sense of, from basically the 50s even up to like the Marcos era, there was a lot of nationalism going on in the Philippines. So it's like even like when they do the FMA, they take away a lot of the thrust because that was seen as very European. But there were other styles, because I remember the style I was shown, instead of 1 and 2, right? It was a pattern. Did you ever read the pulp novels that they based the Zorro on? Because Zorro was like a pulp novel they would print in magazines during the turn of the century, right? You remember how Zorro would write his Z?
Z, yep.
That's a very common pattern in Batangas, but a lot of people don't know that also exists in other FMA systems. Let me explain that. That first angle is not this one. It's coming from here. It's a midline. Either you will thrust to the eye, or you will slice that level, right? And why is that? Because if you go like this, if you go like that, my natural reaction is a flinch reaction, because I would go like this, I'd pull back, right? Or I would.
Right.
FMA really is like pang-away kalye. It's a military art, but it's dirty. We don't
Dirty,
believe
yeah.
in honor. We're Filipinos. You're supposed to win. Right?
That's the name of the game.
The honor is you win. The honor is like you get to procreate. You get to make a copy of yourself. You have a kid, right? And you have to come back
Yeah.
home to wifey and family, right? So that natural flinch reaction, that first angle would be like this, and then you would turn. So I'm using your perspective, right? So just imagine
Right,
ako yung kalaban, and that you're you. The next thing that you would do to make the Z, you'd turn your wrist. So it would look like this. So it would go like this, and then you turn your wrist. So wala ka ng ano, there's no more comeback. There's no more you cut the
Recoil.
slices so that you attack immediately. Because you know how I notice how most notice what I do. What's the difference? It looked like I
It's
did
recoil.
the same thing, right?
Yep.
June,
Umaangat yung taga.
Watch.
I showed you this, June.
Yep. I know. We went over this.
Julius, it's just funny because I just showed it to June last weekend.
But you know that trick because Timog Katagalugan yun. That's a style, right?
Yep.
Because here's the
Yep.
thing. So I'm gonna give. Fuck it, let's share it, right? Because we're gonna die, right?
Yeah.
Bring it on.
Secret yan, secret! Huwag mong ilabas yan!
Cut.
We gotta
Ay,
delete that.
lumabas.
Joke lang. Sharing tayo, sharing.
You gotta
No,
edit that
no,
out.
no.
You gotta edit that out.
Pero may similarities yung mga blade arts.
Yeah,
no?
you gotta
Kasi
edit that out. So
may
what we would do is we would
Ito pa
practice
ako.
that, right? We'd practice that, like we would look in the mirror and be like, boom. So because like you have to orient, like not every single person that you're gonna fight is gonna be the same height. Some are gonna be giants. Some are gonna be short.
Yep.
So nakatalikod ka. Ganun ka. Harap ka dun sa ano. And so that you become good at like gauging that, what eye line they are, so they can't see how long your weapon is. So shit like that. It's these little things, right? These little.
It's the
I'm
details.
not gonna give away a lot. I already gave too much away.
You already gave too much away.
I already gave too
Yeah,
much away.
tama.
Okay.
You gotta
So-
edit that out, Henry. Gotta go.
Hindi ba i-edit yan? Diretso yan.
No, you gotta edit that out because I'll get in trouble. I'm not joking.
So, just to make sure everything is clear, pag yung sinabi ni Julius na talahib, when I was growing up, ang talahib then it can be as high as me.
Right.
So when we say talahib, it's not like the little grass that you see. I mean, talahib can be as high as me, and sharp edges, masakit pag masugatan ka dun sa talahib lang yun.
It
Ano
feels
ba
like a
sa-
hypodermic
ano-
needle
ano-
pinching your skin.
Yes.
Ano ba sa English yan? Di ba meron yun sa Vietnam?
Tall
They
grass,
encountered that.
you know, tall grass.
No. They call it something else because they encountered it in Vietnam. Eh.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
so going back to like the pattern, right? So instead of having numbers in some systems in the Katagalugan, they'd have patterns, right? So they teach you is like there's no 1 or 2 or whatever, right? It's still kind of the clock system, but it's more like sacred geometry patterns. So Z was a common one, but particularly in Batangas, because you would go 1 and then turn your wrist, and then 2 would be like this, a 1, 2, and then that Z strike is right where the kneecap is or the shin. You understand?
Oh, that low.
Because your natural flinch reaction if you're the opponent is like you'll go like this, right? But your foot is exposed. Hindi mo ginawa yung lutang. So they will go turn the wrist, boom. So cut here and then finish with the bottom part of the Z. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3. Yung paa mo, your knee or your shin. So that's just very basic stuff.
So Julius, when you were learning that the catalog, when
Tagalog.
Tagalog,
Southern Tagalog style. Southern Tagalog.
tagal na ako nandito.
Lasing na eh.
Tagay!
Nakita mo ba silang mababa?
Yeah. Merong mga
Lumababa
sistema
pa.
na manlulupa. Yeah. And the reason for that
Manlulupa, correct.
is this is what I noticed. The ones that are Spanish influenced, they don't know so much about that because the thing is they are high up because they kind of it's destreza, like you know what I mean. It's European influence, right? But if yung sa mga dulong barrio sa Masukal, they're low. Obviously, I'm a little kid, so they
Low,
look
correct.
giants to me because I'm like a tiny kid. But they're low because and the reason why, and I think the reason why it's like that, they come from the farming areas, madulas, maputik. So they have to think about a different type of footwork instead of having a completely distressed type of footwork. They got to keep their footing, right? And back then,
Saka kadalasan yan di ba kadalasan yan nakabaon din sila sa putik.
yeah,
Yung paa nila
exactly.
nakabaon sa putik.
Hindi pa yun. Some of them, kung hindi chinelas lang, talagang nakatapak. That's how portion.
Nakatapak, yep.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
I agree.
Nakikita ko yung mga term na similarity na sinasabi ni Julius. Let's say for example yung mga talahib. Kasi sa Laguna may tinatawag rin kaming tagang talahib.
Kugon, parang kugon, right? Right.
Kung pag sila yung tagang talahib, ang taga nun, sa amin sa baba ang intindi ko. Tagang tuhod o tagang talahib.
Right,
o pwedeng
right.
tagang
that's
baywang.
the minimum. You know why it's called like that? Because that's the minimum height of the grass. It gets much bigger as Paul was saying. It gets to be your height.
Hindi ba dahil pagka syempre I always cut grass eh. Literally doon mo titirahin yung grass eh. Because you're cutting yung talahib eh.
Right.
You don't cut yung talahib sa taas. For one thing, it won't fall. Kasi sasama lang yun eh.
Yeah.
Correct.
So I'm not saying like I don't want to criticize other FMA styles, right? So try to get rid of that part. Don't include that in our video. But because
edit out yun na yung kaya nga may chismis tayo kanina.
Edit out whatever that. But so I just want to correct myself, right? I'm not saying that this is a bad position. I'm not saying this is a bad position. I'm not saying all the other hand positions in FMA like this are bad. I'm not saying that. I am saying there is a right position if you're using a blade as opposed to a stick. There's a right position when you're using an edge weapon, like so, like that, as opposed to you're fighting with a cylinder, right? And also a right hand position depending on what range you are, because you can't pull some like what you're gonna do a big slice when you're this close, when you're in like in Dumag range almost, when the person's like right here. Of course not. So you have to orient how you hold the weapon depending how close or how far you are to the opponent. But that's the thing. There are certain forms that are better to hold, especially if you're using this chop.
Yep.
You know.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Wow.
I don't want to get in trouble with the FMA. So, but get rid of the distance thing because I gave away too many secrets already.
Okay. Baka mahirapan si Kuya Henry mag-edit Ang dami
Dami
information.
Bahala lang sa mood ko.
Yun lang naman ang pakitain yung distansya.
Yung distansya. Paano yung yung position ng para wag okay lang Kala ko ba yun yung nag-react sila?
Yun nga eh.
Yung distansya kasi, ang weirdo kasi yung distansya kahit naman sabihin mo minsan pinakita lang nga sa akin ni Anthony Hindi din makukuha ng ibang tao.
I know, you know what? Here's the thing. Even though I gave it away, you know the reason why people don't get it? Yeah. They don't understand the footwork.
Yeah,
correct.
Because I'm just showing like up to here. I'm not showing you like where my foot is and my knees. People don't understand how here's the thing. People don't understand how important that is.
Yes. That is
when you Paul, when you do a spinning back kick, how do you know that the kick that you hit the bag with is gonna hit the target? What body part do you orient to make sure that it hits the target that you want?
Your foot.
Which foot?
The back end of the heel.
Of which one? So it's little things like that. People think that Eskrima is like.
And wait, let me continue that. But on a kick, everything will line up on impact.
Exactly. So but you have to raise the knee first. Yep. See, that's the thing. The proper way to really transfer as much kinetic energy to the target Is you have to
Correct.
raise that knee and straighten that thing out. So a great example of this is Joe Rogan. He does a good spinning back kick, pretty decent.
Yeah. He
Um,
even did a round kick wherein his foot is parallel to the target, but because he knows how to generate power, he can do it. But if you're a beginner, not knowing body mechanics, you're gonna screw it up.
Yeah,
absolutely.
you
And here's the thing: not
normally,
only you are
yeah.
gonna screw it up, you might injure yourself.
Correct. You
Yeah,
might injure
You're
yourself.
generating peak, like, peak hit right before you hit the target, or like you're too close and you'll jam up your knee or your whole musculature. People don't understand. Like, people think that FMA, like, if you really want old FMA, meaning like indigenous forms and then plus EMA,
Yep.
that's real FMA, right? I'm not talking about Moro. I'm not talking about yung mga taga Kalinga, because that's also FMA, but I don't want to call them necessarily Filipino because they want to be their own thing. That's fine with me. Ayos lang sa
Correct.
akin yun.
Yep.
Right? Kasi tayo mga Tagalog, tayo nagsulat nung konstitusyon, and we made sure that we include everyone. If they want to be
Correct.
included, then they're included. If not, just read the original Constitution of Malolos. Right?
Yep.
Just read that one. If you're a half-breed, you're Filipino. If you're born na meron kang Pilipinong dugo outside, Pinoy ka pa rin. That's fine. If you don't
Pinoy
want
ka
to
pa
get
rin.
included by us, that's fine with me too. Right?
Yeah.
But what I am
Tama.
saying is, if we're talking about real FMA, yung luma, yung indigenous form natin na parang may kilos ng silat, incheck, at saka mga taga-India, na dinugtong natin ng EMA, if you really want that, to really know that, and how you know you got the right teacher that knows the old way, it's about this. The mechanics here, the movements of the feet, the orientation of the knee, and little things like this.
Yeah.
You understand?
We understand.
Yung pag like you see what I mean? Like the baiting,
Yeah.
yung mga baiting tactics na gano'n, yung para so you would elicit a response, because what you're doing is you're hijacking their central nervous system, because they're gonna be like, ay naku, like, and then that slight impulse moment like this,
Yep.
that's what creates the opening. Because the thing is, it slows down their reaction time.
Yep.
Yep. Now I'm gonna be.
So yeah, exactly. So that's the thing. That's why it's important to have a poker face. Like,
Dahan-dahan ka, pare. Dahan-dahan. Baka lumabas ang mga secret.
Pindot na yan. Yeah.
Kaya tahimik lang tayo dito eh. It's like, yes lang ng yes.
Yari tayong 5. Dahan-dahan.
dahan nga. But those are the things that they don't talk about. That here's the thing. Those
Correct.
traditions, they didn't die in Southern Tagalog.
They didn't die, yeah?
No.
Saka,
Hey.
a little bit of the history, di ba? Karamihan sa Amerika sinasabi na kaya raw ang magandang old stylist na Mindanao side kasi yun lang daw ang hindi na-invade ng Kastila.
That's not true.
Mali yun eh. That's not true.
That's not true. They went there too.
That is not true. They went there. I mean, they didn't conquer the whole Mindanao, but guess what? They didn't conquer the whole Cordillera. Am I right?
No.
They didn't. They didn't do that either. So
No, whatever reactionary force that they sent to conquer Kalinga was annihilated.
correct. It was annihilated.
They were
So they
annihilated. So they were
really
able to
never
keep their culture. Here's the thing. Yung sa Kalinga, they practiced headhunting until the 20th century.
Correct.
Early 20th century.
Correct.
So that's not true.
Kaya
Like,
nga nakakatawa eh kasi may mga storya na if you don't really do your research. Kaya guys, yung mga Pilipino sa dyan sa na gumagawa ng FMA, pag meron kayong mga storya, do your research, do your diligence and study and learn history
Yun na.
and whatnot. Kasi
Due
maraming
diligence.
sabi-sabi na mali. Kasi ako din papunta rin ako sa track na yan na patay na ang FMA sa buong Luzon and Visaya, only in Mindanao. Then when I start doing my research, hindi nila na-conquer ang
we
They
just
they never got to the highland. They
No,
only go to the lowland.
Actually, ang nako-confuse yung mga tao when people say na hindi popular sa Philippines. They're talking about sport. Pero yung culture itself, if you go out pala, lumabas ka, like nagulat ako, pucha, very pala sa Paete. Still alive, yung the real thing, what they're talking about, di ba siya, sabi lang, namamatay ganyan. They're talking about the sport. Kasi, syempre, even naman taekwondo, karate, sport na yan eh. FMA is not popular as a sport.
And
Pero yung culture going out, it's still there.
and here's the thing, outside of maybe like the recent era of like the last few years, and obviously I gave away too much already tonight. I don't know, I'm a little drunk, I suppose. But
they won't get it.
here's the thing, we just don't fucking tell you. We don't share it to you because you're not a family member of ours. It's not dead. He's not dead. Hindi patay. We just keep
Yeah.
it in family. We don't fucking share this shit.
Family.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's all
Yep.
it is. So to say
That's
it's
all it
dead,
is.
it's like, how can it be dead? Like my Lolo's doing this shit. I was like, how can it be dead? Like I learned from my Lolo. Like, you know what I mean? And here's the thing, like I went to all these seminars and like train over here. I'm like, I mean, no offense, di naman ako nagmamayabang. A lot of them don't know this stuff. Like
Because
a lot of them don't know like the real thing, like the old way. Like, you know, I'm like, man, they really only learn from like the dojo. They haven't
correct.
used it yet.
Yeah.
I've used it.
And yeah.
Tell us about that.
I can't talk about that.
Dapat off-cam.
Off-cam yan, off-cam.
Yeah, that's
Mga
all.
mga tao. Yeah.
Kaya o kaya
Kaso-
pagtapos na yung statutes of limitations.
Kaso di ba, tama naman kasi, kaya kagaya ko, I mean, I'm getting on the age where I want to pass it to somebody else. So, minsan nga, I don't know if June's listening to me, but sometimes I talk to him, I go, June, you stick with me, I'll give you everything that I know. It's the way you pass it to a friend, a family.
So here's the thing. Y'all been nice to me. So like if when I meet you two, I want to learn from Anthony because he knows the shit. Like he knows the 8. Yung sinasabi nila sa kalis, yung 8 apak. It's not just on that style because it's really based on Italian fencing. But the thing is, in Laguna, you guys have figured out a way. I noticed this. Like if you go to, have never been to Paite, right? But it goes like that. That's actually 3 circles. So I'm not gonna. I gotta phrase this correctly so I don't get in trouble.
I was like, which direction are we going with this?
Wala kayo. Bibigay ko sa inyo yung video, kayo mag-edit.
Because yung sa luma, here's the thing. I don't mean no offense to people that practice European martial arts here, right? But Hema, as it is now, it's an invention. Because I don't mean no offense, because I'm not saying all Hema. I'm saying most Hema styles, they learn from the book. Why? Because it actually died.
It died, correct.
It actually died, and they're like, oh, ganun ang gawin natin. Let's do that move, because it seems like, but here's the thing, by learning that way, you actually might be doing a misinterpretation of what they were actually doing. So let me explain. Diba, we already, this I could give away, because this was the FMA. This one's okay, because they talked about an FMA discussion, right? This one, right?
Yes.
People had the Abanico debate,
Nako.
right?
Oo.
See,
Lagi.
it becomes a misinterpretation. Why? Because the fight dynamic of fighting with cylinder, as opposed to something that is actually sharp with an edge, is very different. Because this is fine, right?
Yep.
But you can't do that with a blade. The original form wasn't like that. The original form, make kilos paa for the very movement that you go like this. It's like a sword chow in Fiore de Batalla, the Zweihander sword. Pag ganon,
Yeah.
tas dito ang kilos, right? Thank God na putol bago ko nabigay yung secret. sabi ko, Bob. Ah. Po? I recording, yeah. Opo. Opo, nirecord ko. I'm still recording po.